Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, General Welch, thank you for your testimony. I want to begin by just thanking you and the airmen you lead for what you do. You know, your testimony highlights a lot of things that I don't think most Americans are aware of, like constant combat operations for a quarter century. It's remarkable. And the broader number of areas in which you specialize: fighters, close air support, ISR, strategic airlift, 2/3 of the nuclear triad, GPS systems. You know, my state sees a lot of this on a daily basis. As you know, the F-22 fighter squadron just recently deployed to Korea and Japan as a show of force for our allies there. We're intercepting Russian bombers again, almost on a weekly basis. And, you know, in Alaska, we become the combat of air power in the Asia-Pacific, if not for the country, in terms of F-16s, F-22s, C-17s, KC-135s, AWACS, H-860s, C-130s, F-35s coming, J-Park. So I just appreciate and see a lot in terms of the airmen that you're leading. Let me ask a basic question. Actually, two. How's morale? When you are here testifying, talking about cutting forces, cutting readiness, you know, that's got to impact morale. And then a broader, more strategic question, you're here talking about a budget that's cutting our ability to do what the Air Force does best, the smallest Air Force in our history. Why do you believe the President or Secretary of Defense is putting forward such a small budget? So why don't we begin with morale?
Morale, actually, if you visit as many airmen as I'm privileged to visit, and Chief Cody is privileged to visit, and Secretary James is privileged to visit, you walk away with the perception that morale is pretty darn good. They're a little tired.
Great.
They have questions. They're concerned about the future because they actually are very connected to what goes on in this city and in all these issues we've been talking about.
Right.
They pay attention. Even our very young airmen do. And all the services are this way now. They're worried about their future, the future of their mission set, what's happening to their airplane, their squadron, their family services. All those things are of interest to them. And so they sense this pressure on resources, which is going to affect those things over time. But when it comes to how proud they are of who they are, of what they represent, of the people they stand beside, and of how well they do their job, morale is not an issue.
Great. That's good to hear. How about on the budget?
I think the budget is, well, you'll have to talk to the President and Secretary of Defense to get why they're submitting the budgets they are, sir. But I'll tell you this, the folks in the Air Force just see what we're asked to do. And they want to do it better than anybody else on the planet can do it. And when they don't feel they have the right tools to get that done, or there are too many things to do for the number of people they have standing around them, they get frustrated by that.
Let me ask on the F-35s. You know, Lieutenant General Bogdan has highlighted that you're beginning to reduce the unit price of the F-35A to well below $100 million, but your budget proposes decreasing procurement from 43 to 43 from 48. Does this risk undermining or reversing the reduction of unit costs in terms of what you've been able to do to drive down costs?
Go ahead, Mom.
I was going to say, we don't believe so, not for the short run, and the reason for that, because when you decrease the buy, ordinarily the unit cost does go up.
Right.
But what the dynamic is over the next several years is that because of the FMS buys being higher, we believe that the unit cost will be stable, reasonably stable, and not go up dramatically because of this. And as you said, General Bogdan is very focused on cost control and continuing to do better and better.
And do you believe that this is the reduction in procurement, is that going to impact the arrival of F-35s that are scheduled in places like Eielson or other bases around the country?
Senator, over the next 15 years, it will affect, if we stayed at the lower production rate, over the next 15 years, it would mean 2 fewer squadrons would field between now and 2030. So it's going to affect someplace. In the near term, it won't have a dramatic effect because we'll still be standing units up. But by 15 to 20, or 10 to 15 years from now, you will start to see a delay in bed down of units.
Let me ask one final question. You know, I want to follow up on what Senator King had talked about on the procurement timeline and how the procurement timeline for major weapon systems has increased dramatically over the years. In the NDAA last year, the chairman and others on this committee were very focused on giving you more authority over procurement. What do you believe is the most important thing we can do, either the services or the Congress or both, to help bring down the procurement timeline of major weapon systems that we've seen grow over the years that I don't think anyone is satisfied with?
Well, first of all, the changes of last year, I think, are very positive, and to the extent now that the Air Force and the Navy and the Army will be able to be the MDA, the decision authority for milestones going forward on some of the newer programs, I think that will help as we go forward. Continue, so my advice to you would be to continue, and we do the same thing with our regulations, continue to look to streamline wherever possible. Sometimes we have the approach of lots and lots of oversight. We do this, you do this, and although that is, I think, a good idea on troubled programs, we have to do that when things have gone amiss. Sometimes you need to ease up a little bit on the vast majority of programs that are actually going quite well. And because we have a set of rules that tends to apply to most programs at a certain dollar level, even the programs that are executing well nonetheless have the weight of what I'll call a lot of oversight. So I would say continue to look to streamline, and we should do the same thing on our end. General,
Any thoughts on that?
Senator, I believe that to really reform acquisition, you should start with smaller programs and look at them in a very concentrated way. 95% of the acquisition programs in the Air Force are on cost and schedule. They don't get the same attention the big programs do, but they're going tremendously well, and they normally do. If you identified some category of those smaller programs and went to the program managers and their industry partners and said, what can you do to take 50% of time and 25% of cost out of your small program, and then gave them the leeway to do that and looked at the results, we may be able to learn which things are not adding value to the process and then bring those up into the bigger programs. When we start with the big programs, nobody really wants to give up oversight control, and it's harder to make change that way. But we've got a lot of programs that work really well. Let's make them work much, much better, and then learn the lessons from that to change the enterprise.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr.